The night the town finally noticed him was the same night the rain came down hard enough to blur the streetlights into trembling halos, and the same night a tired biker sat alone on the curb beside a dead motorcycle, staring at the weight of a life that had gone wrong, one bill, one mistake, one broken promise at a time. His name was Daniel Carter, and for years people had only seen the leather jacket, the scar on his cheek, the rumble of his bike echoing through streets that never seemed to welcome him. They never saw the debt notices folded and refolded in his pocket, the eviction warning taped crookedly to his apartment door, or the quiet way he sat on his bed every night wondering how a man who once dreamed of freedom ended up owing everyone and belonging nowhere. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us we're still human, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Daniel had arrived in the town of Ridgeway almost a decade earlier, riding in with nothing but a used motorcycle, a duffel bag, and the belief that moving forward was the same thing as moving on. He took work wherever hands were needed, unloading trucks, fixing fences, patching roofs, and sometimes guarding the back door of a bar that smelled of old beer and regrets. When his bike broke down, he borrowed money. When work slowed, he borrowed more. When medical bills came after a crash that twisted his leg and his pride, the debt grew teeth. Ridgeway was the kind of town that watched quietly, the kind that whispered before it spoke aloud, and soon Daniel's name carried a weight heavier than his boots. He became the man people crossed the street to avoid, the man landlords refused, the man shop owners watched too closely. Nobody asked how he was doing because everyone assumed they already knew. The debt collector letters started arriving like clockwork, each one colder than the last, and Daniel learned the sound of footsteps outside his door well enough to hold his breath when they paused too long. Pride kept him from asking for help, and fear kept others from offering it. He sold tools, then memories, then pieces of himself he didn't know how to get back. On Sundays, when the town gathered at the diner after church, Daniel stayed away, eating from cans and listening to the radio for company. The loneliness settled into his bones, and with it came the quiet belief that maybe this was all he deserved. The night his motorcycle died for good, it felt like the final betrayal. Rain soaked through his jacket as he pushed it to the side of the road, muscles shaking, chest tight with the kind of panic that comes when there is nowhere left to run. He sat down hard on the curb, head in his hands, unaware that someone was watching from across the street. Her name was Evelyn Moore, a school librarian who had lived in Ridgeway her entire life and had learned to see the things others overlooked. She had noticed Daniel before, not because he frightened her, but because he looked tired in a way that felt familiar. Evelyn knew about tired. She knew about loss. Years earlier, her husband had died suddenly, leaving behind a quiet house and a life that felt unfinished. Helping others had become her way of breathing again. She didn't rush across the street that night. She waited, letting the rain slow, letting the moment become real. When she finally approached, it wasn't with suspicion or pity, but with the simple presence of someone willing to stand nearby when the world felt heavy. She offered help without conditions, not money at first, not solutions, just a place to sit out of the rain and a phone call to a tow truck she knew would come even if payment was delayed. That small act cracked something open in Daniel. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was enough to keep him from walking away into the dark. Evelyn listened as he spoke in broken fragments about debt, about mistakes, about how the town saw him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She carried his story carefully, like something fragile. Word travels fast in small towns, and by morning, Ridgeway was buzzing with a different kind of rumor. People whispered about the librarian helping the biker, about debts, about kindness that didn't make sense. Some shook their heads. Others felt something stir. Evelyn didn't stop at that first night. She helped Daniel organize his papers, understand what he owed, and who he owed it to. She made calls, asked questions, and found paths where Daniel had only seen walls. It wasn't magic. It was work. Slow, patient, human work. As weeks passed, people began to notice changes. Daniel showed up to community cleanups. He fixed broken steps at the library. He helped an elderly man repair a fence without asking for anything in return. The leather jacket was still there, but so was a humility that softened it. The town watched, unsure at first, then curious. When a local business owner quietly forgave part of Daniel's debt after seeing him help his brother, something shifted. When the diner owner offered him meals in exchange for maintenance work, the story grew louder. The debt that had once threatened to bury Daniel became a mirror held up to Ridgway itself. People saw how easy it was to label, to dismiss, to step aside. They also saw how powerful it was to step forward. Donations appeared anonymously. Work offers came with handshakes instead of suspicion. Daniel paid what he could, when he could, and for the first time, it felt like progress instead of punishment. Evelyn never took credit. She said the town was just remembering who it used to be. But Daniel knew the truth. One person had chosen to see him when nobody else did, and that choice had changed everything. The motorcycle was eventually repaired, not as an escape, but as a symbol. Daniel rode it through Ridgway not to leave, but to belong. Children waved. Neighbors nodded. The debt no longer defined him, and neither did his past. Near the end of that year, a town meeting was called, not about Daniel, but because of him. Ridgway decided to create a small fund to help residents facing sudden hardship, managed quietly, without shame. It was called the Second Mile Fund, inspired by the idea that going a little further for someone could change a life. Daniel stood at the back of the room, overwhelmed, realizing that his struggle had become a turning point not just for him, but for everyone. If this story is touching your heart right now, if it's reminding you that compassion still matters in a world that often feels cold, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and let your engagement help more stories like this reach the people who need them most. Daniel still rides his bike on rainy nights sometimes, not because he's running, but because he remembers where he was when everything felt lost. He remembers the weight of debt, the silence of being unseen, and the power of one person's kindness. Ridgway still has its flaws, but it carries a new awareness now, a quiet promise that nobody should fall alone. Before the story ends, please comment the word hope and share what this story made you feel or who it reminded you of. In the end, the biker debt that shook a town wasn't just about money. It was about the cost of indifference and the priceless value of compassion, about how one woman's courage to help rewrote a man's future and reminded an entire town of its soul.